All right, welcome everybody back to Politically Plain. This is a channel where we go through politics and I try to explain it as simply as possible in order to help you out. Today we are going to go through the VP debates, the vice presidential debate, and I'm going to give my opinion on who won, and I'm going to go through a majority of the categories that they went through, and I'll essentially try to explain very simply what each candidate said and who I thought won. So at the tops of the screens, I'm going to put Vance and Walz, a little picture of them. I'm doing it out of 4 points. So occasionally, they'll split. So I give 2 and 2. If I think one of them won a little bit, but the other was still pretty good, I'll give 3 and 1. And if it was just kind of a wipeout, then I'd do 4 and 0. So the issue number one that I'll start with is the border issue. And first of all, it's very obvious that both want to fix the border issue. It was very obvious from the debate that they both wanted to fix it. I think Vance made a much more convincing argument that the Trump administration would actually get something done, especially since the border issue has gotten worse under Biden. And Walz, I think, did make the argument that, well, in the last 6 months or the last year, it's actually gotten better. Either way, it got worse under Biden. In this one, I'm giving 3 points to Vance and 1 to Walz. I'm giving 1 to Walz just because I actually think he did a really good job of maintaining himself during the border issue. But I'm giving the bonus point or the upper hand to Vance just because his was more convincing. I think if you watch it, it was just more convincing. Okay, number 2, economic. So the economics section was really good. I really liked it. So Walz talked about tax cuts leading to offshoring, which, Vance kind of pushed back on that tax cuts don't lead to that. But if you read into a lot of the literature, you'll find that tax cuts, especially under the Reagan era, that's when a lot of offshoring occurred. And that was that was huge tax cuts. And the reason is, if you want a little history lesson, when large corporations get major tax cuts, they have a lot more money that they hold on to, so they want to invest it. And what they usually do is they invest it where they can, they want to make more money. I mean, every corporation wants to make money. So they'll invest the money that they're saving into, cheaper labor, cheaper materials. And of course, it's no secret that United States labor is very expensive, and United States materials, for the most part, are very expensive. So when you cut taxes on corporations, generally they offshore, and then it's a big debate on how you get them back. I think the Trump administration and Vance made an argument that they have a plan to get them back, which I think could be effective, but so does Walz. And anyways, so I think Walz is right about tax cuts leading to offshoring and the removal of production in the United States. And I think Vance is just kind of, I don't want to say he's misinformed, but I think he just believes that trickle-down economics and tax cuts on corporations works. I think he's just misinformed on that. I don't think that's necessarily how it works. Just, again, because I'm trying to be unbiased here, the literature and the research shows that when you cut taxes, offshoring occurs. Large corporations in production generally moves outside the United States because, again, they have more money, so they invest in other places where it's cheap. So the other thing about the economics was they talked about tariffs a little bit, and Walz tried to attack the whole tariffs, but he essentially said that the tariffs that the Trump administration wanted to input would be essentially a tax on the U.S. citizens, and that's just not how tariffs work. Sure, it could lead to more expensive goods, but on the other hand, Vance argued that the tariffs would bring in a lot more money for the United States. So it's a give and take. I think Walz just kind of dropped the ball on it when he talked about tariffs. He really didn't make a good argument in my head that tariffs would be a tax on the citizens, because it's just not true. That's not how it works. So the other issue is Walz really needed to jump around on this topic because the economy right now just kind of isn't great. And then he also brought up the whole COVID shutdown during 2020 and how Trump he criticized Trump for shutting down, but I kind of find that ironic because if you go back to 2020, I mean, everybody was calling for a shutdown of the government, and probably more so Democrats. So, and throughout the debate, Walz kind of criticizes Trump for not listening to experts, but Trump did listen to experts in 2020, which shut down the economy, which Democrats wanted, and now Walz kind of had to like jump back and be like, oh, well, because he listened and because he shut it down, like that's why Biden and Harris now have this terrible economy. So I wasn't a big fan of that, but anyways, both had some good points and made good arguments, but I think it was just kind of like, no one took the upper hand in this. So I'm giving 2 to each, so 2 and 2, just because it's split. Again, Vance is just misinformed on the effects of tax cuts. Wasn't a fan of that. Wasn't a fan of Walz jumping around about the economy and COVID and the shutdown and why the economy's bad right now. Okay, third topic discussed was abortion. This one was kind of a clear case of the whole Federalists, anti-Federalists, if you remember that video I did. I mean, literally the whole abortion thing came down to Walz simply does not believe that states should have more rights, and he doesn't believe that states should decide if abortion should be legal or not legal, and doesn't think the states should be able to decide. He thinks the federal government should be able to decide. And on the other hand, Vance doesn't believe that a stronger government can help with abortion. He thinks that the states should have more rights and that a stronger government isn't as good. Again, the whole anti-federalist, federalists, and what I have argued is at the very core the difference between Democrats and Republicans, and that was very evident in the abortion scene. Again, I'm giving this 2 and 2 just because this is very like whatever you as an individual believe. If you think that a state having the ability to choose and you directly voting in a state for your representatives is more democratic or is better for you, then I think Vance clearly won. I mean, he's literally making the argument that the state should be able to decide and you as the individual should vote in state elections and vote in people who want your view. And Walz, on the other hand, is saying, no, that's not how it should be. We should establish essentially a one law that is over all of the United States. And you shouldn't, and if you believe that, you should just vote for the president or you should vote for your representatives in the states who then go to Congress and whatever. If you believe in that, then of course Walz won. Again, I'm giving it 2 and 2 just because it's kind of dependent on what you believe. I don't think either made a more convincing argument. I thought both were convincing enough. Anyways, again, I give it a tie, 2-2. Neither were more convincing, so it's kind of, the whole abortion thing's kind of whatever you think is the right way to go. Okay, the next one is gun issues, and I might get a lot of hate for my take on the gun issue part. So I'm not gonna spoil it, but let's get into it. Gun issue. So Vance, of course, his idea to help the whole gun issue and like school shootings and gun violence throughout the United States is increasing security at schools. Which is a decent idea. I just am kind of unsure how effective it would be, and it'd probably be pretty expensive. But I also think that there should be a lot more investment into public education. So, again, decent idea. Walz, I think, made a really, really good argument. So he is claiming that the administration does not want to do the whole take guns and forcefully take guns from the American people, but claims and argued that he wants to eliminate guns that are extremely deadly. And he kept saying he wants to keep weapons in family homes. He wants people to have guns. He's very Second Amendment, but he wants to make it difficult for most weapons to obtain most weapons, and for some weapons to just make it impossible to buy, such as those that are like high-capacity semi-auto weapons. So Walz, another kind of big thing is he brought up mental health issues and suicides via weapons, which is something that needs to be talked about more. Not just that, I'm not a fan when a lot of Democrats just make the whole, guns kill people, and you get rid of guns. But when you bring in mental health and how if you have the poor mental health and the mental health issue that's in the United States, and you add guns to it, then it becomes in my head, a way better argument. Because again, there is a serious mental health issue in the United States when you can point to a lot of different places for that, whether it be social media or, whatever it may be. So anyways, I think Walz killed it. I mean, Vance essentially just he made the whole increased security at schools argument, and that was like his argument. But Walz, I think, really, really dug in, brought up his idea that he wants weapons in family homes. He wants guns in family homes, but he wants to make these high-capacity semi-auto weapons essentially impossible. And he brought up mental health issues. And he even said that there is a middle ground, and he was like, he said that he would commit to finding a middle ground, and he believed very firmly that there was a middle ground that Democrats and Republicans could come to, and it would make sense for everybody. With that being said, I think Walz did really good. I'm giving Walz 3 and Vance 1. The only reason I'm giving Vance 1 is because I actually like his increased security at schools idea. But otherwise, Walz was much more convincing, and I think he did a lot better job in the debate over the gun issue, which is surprising, and I think a lot of people might find that surprising, but I actually think he did really good. Okay, so now housing. Housing was a pretty interesting. I didn't actually think they'd talk about housing, but I'm really glad they did. So Walz essentially discussed a down payment assistance, and that this is an idea that Harris had, and Harris and Walz have been talking about. Essentially, it's just passing a law or act where a down payment assistance is given to those to first-time home buyers. So if you're a first-time home buyer, you could apply for this program where you would be given assistance for the down payment on a new home. So I think that's a great idea. It could be expensive. I would just have to see how they decided to implement it, but it's a good idea. Walz also brought up that we need to have more affordable housing, which I think is a good idea, a really good idea. It just has to be done correctly, but it's a really good idea. The other thing was Vance brought up illegal immigration driving up housing costs, which I think is kind of a terrible argument to make, if I'm being honest. He also talked about opening up American energy and reducing regulation, which is actually a good idea. That could help housing costs and actually provide more land to build houses. So that was a good idea, but overall, I think Walz really did a really good job on the housing part. So I'm giving Walz 4 and Vance 0, just because Vance really didn't have any, I feel like he didn't attack the housing issue. He kind of just jumped around it and said we need to blame this. And it's well, what should we do? And Walz actually gave you something to chew on. This is what we want to do. These are the issues. This is what we want to provide. And it made sense. So we're giving Walz 4, Vance 0. Okay. So next one is healthcare. So Vance attacked large corporations for jacking up prices and believed there needed to be more price transparency. And I was super surprised that he brought that up, actually. You don't hear a lot of politicians attack large corporations, and especially the pharmaceutical companies. So when he brought that up, I was kind of jaw drop. I was super surprised. So he believes that there needs to be essentially more price transparency so that we know, and everyone knows, how prices are being established by these large corporations. So again, he argued for reducing regulation, which would greatly decrease the cost of pharmaceuticals and healthcare, and would allow for much more affordable healthcare and prescriptions. So a major argument against Obamacare and a lot of Obamacare is that Obamacare is so regulated that it actually makes Obamacare very expensive for most people. And so Vance essentially argued we should just take these regulations and reduce them for Obamacare so that it's much more affordable for all, which is a good idea. And Walz on the other hand, didn't really propose a solution to healthcare other than just keeping Obamacare. He didn't really attack the whole reduce regulations. He just kind of said, Obamacare is good. Let's keep it. And then Walz kind of just jumped to the whole, if you vote for Trump, he's going to repeal Obamacare, and which is not true because, one, Trump was in office for 4 years. He did try to, but he ended up not repealing it, and then he ended up actually adjusting Obamacare so it was better and a little more affordable, which did happen. And so Walz arguing that Trump would repeal Obamacare, I don't think holds any because he didn't in the 4 years, and he's been saying along with Vance that they just want to reduce regulations so that it's more affordable. Again, I think Vance killed this one. So on this one, I think I'm giving Vance 4 and Walz 0 just because, again, just like with the housing, Vance kind of gave you something to chew on and like understand versus Walz just kind of didn't really give you much to think about. It was just kind of like, oh, we're going to keep Obamacare. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't really tell us how you're going to make healthcare more affordable or, how you're going to get more people on it and whatever. So I'm giving Vance 4 and Walz 0 on this one. That one also might be surprising to people. So, okay, childcare. This was another one where I was surprised we talked about, but I really liked we talked about it, and they both had great ideas. And actually, they pretty much had the same idea. So Walz discussed paid family leave, medical leave when you have a child, which is obviously, we do that now, but I think he wanted it extended and a little more, which I really like. And his argument, which was really good, was that when you have paid family leave, it increases the health of the family. So you have a healthier family, which means you'll have better businesses because people are healthier and happier. And it places a lot more emphasis on the individual and not so much on profit and corporations, which I think is really good. And he articulated it very well, very, very, very well. So, and actually Vance agreed that there needs to be better paid family leave. And he actually made an interesting argument though, which I kind of liked. Actually, I really liked, but he argued for a choice system where women can choose if they want to stay with the kids longer or go back to work quicker. So Vance's argument was really that there needs to be options and there shouldn't be a one policy for all type of system, which I liked. And essentially both also, Vance and Walz said that their administration would promise a child tax credit for families. So when you have children, you get a tax credit, and both were on board with that. So again, I liked both arguments. Both arguments gave you something to chew on. They were both really good. They were both very convincing. So I'm splitting this. This is 2 and 2. Yeah, both. I could easily see someone saying like Walz won that or Vance won that. So I think they tied, if I'm being honest. Okay, state of democracy was the last one. And of course, they brought up the state of democracy, and of course, January 6th came up. January 6th, threats to democracy. I did a video on threat to democracy, and that was one of the topics. So the threat to democracy, Vance claimed the threat to democracy was the censorship going on in large corporations. So, the censorship is essentially, what Vance is talking about is that a lot of conservative writers or podcasts, whatever public speakers are being kind of like shadow censored. So they're not like outwardly being like shut down like a lot of people like a lot of Republicans may think, but there are instances where Republican talking points are being kind of put to the side on like social media in favor of more left-leaning talking points. So Vance claims that that's kind of a threat, the threat to democracy. And of course, Walz's argument is that the threat to democracy is just Republicans, essentially. Well, more specifically, it's just Trump. Trump is the threat to democracy. And so, of course, Vance goes into like media are suppressing viewpoints, which is directly anti-democratic. And then again, Walz is Trump. And I think Walz has a good point that it's not right for people to physically threaten politicians. So he made the argument that Trump is more violent, which I don't think he as a person is more violent, but I think him as a figure may cause more violence. I think you could make that argument. It'd be really weird, but I think you could. And his point of physically threatening politicians or people in general because of politics is, I would say, is anti-democratic. So I do agree with him there. Again, but I do think it's kind of a long shot to say that Trump is the root, but you can make the argument. Because really, with that, it's political polarization. That's the root. I don't think Trump may be a little catalyst to that, but I mean, really, the catalyst is the media. The media, I mean, how many times have we heard from the media that Trump is a dictator, is Hitler, is a fascist? I mean, that inherently just causes violent emotions to like boil inside you. So, it's kind of weird. But again, his point of threatening people is I liked his point that no one should be physically threatened by anybody. Anyways, Vance's argument that censorship is a more major issue to democracy, I think holds more weight just because it's not, I don't think it was an attack on Democrats necessarily. And if it was, I think I kind of disagree, but I don't remember him saying anything about it's the Democrats censoring us. It was just censorship is a major issue, and it just happens to be, on these left-leaning social media and news networks, which is true. And the reason I think it's more of a threat is because censorship implies the freedom of speech is being suppressed, which is directly a threat to democracy, because in our democracy in the United States, one of our fundamental rights is the freedom of speech. So if it's being censored, well, then that's a direct threat to the democracy. So I think that's much more of he did a better job of articulating and arguing that that's an issue. And so I think with that being said, it's clear both have different views of what democracy is. Walz clearly seems to think that Trump is just a threat to democracy. And again, if you remember my democracy video and I talked about Democrats, their idea of a democracy is a very strong central government. So with Trump wanting to come in and give a lot of power to the states and make the central government smaller, of course, he is technically a threat to their democracy. So either way, I think I'm really just kind of tired of the January 6th talk, just because it's kind of like it's almost old. I think it would have been much more of a convincing argument and a better argument if Walz would have just taken the route of, Trump is a threat to our democracy because he wants to give states back their rights, and he wants to cripple our federal government, and he's going to do that by eliminating a federal pro-choice agenda. He will do that by crippling regulation at the federal level. So if he would have taken that route, I would have given him more points, just because it wouldn't have been this whole like attack on Trump and it him causing January 6th and using all this like very polarizing rhetoric. That's like the whole reason that we're in this state that we're in of major political polarization, is because we keep bringing up January 6th from, however long ago that was. So in this, for the state of democracy, I'm giving 1 point to Walz and 3 points to Vance, just because I think Vance's argument is, in my opinion, a much more large issue. So I'm giving 1 point to Walz just because he does make a good case that, there shouldn't be any... He essentially calls for no violence. He says physically threatening someone because of their political beliefs is not right. And I completely agree, and I think that was a good thing to say. So he almost ruined it by constantly throwing Trump as a threat to democracy and not just saying his policies and like what he stands for are, in his view, a threat. But otherwise, I'm giving him 1 point for the 1 point that I did like. So, and that made sense. Okay, so now we're going to go into... That's actually the end. I don't know what the tally's at right now, but bonus. So I do bonus points. So I'm giving bonus points that they both admitted at the very beginning of the debate, they both admitted they had made mistakes in the past, and that they made mistakes on comments they made, and some things they said they didn't mean, and that's just part of being human. And they were very transparent. So I'm giving 4 points to each, just because I think, like, clap for them. That was fantastic. I actually thought throughout the whole debate they were both very civil, extremely civil, and respectful to one another. I felt like it was a real debate. It didn't feel like, like a kid show. Like, I even feel like the Harris-Trump debate was like, it was more fun to watch if you weren't politically, like, if you aren't into politics. The Trump-Harris debate was more fun to watch, but like for someone like me who I'm very politically oriented, it was like I wanted to gouge my eyes out, because it was like a kid's match, and it felt really like I felt like they talked about nothing. And this, they did talk, like, it felt like a debate. So I'm giving 6 points to each, because just for that reason. I'm giving bonus points. 1 bonus point to Walz. I think he did a really good job of asserting that Vance would constantly shift blame to something, to an outside force like illegal immigration or whatever, and not really attack the issue. Even though Walz kind of did the same thing at times, I like that he actually called it out. So that's +1 to Walz. I'm giving a bonus point to Vance, because he argued that Democrats could not get over Trump, and that a majority of the political polarization that's occurring in the United States is because Democrats can't get over January 6th and Trump. They just can't get past this thing that happened. And I mean, I bet if you took a poll of everyone in the United States of if they still feel affected by January 6th, 99% of people would say no, they don't feel affected by January 6th. So we can move past it. And that's what Vance was arguing, that Democrats claim to be these, wanting peace and wanting to be the peacemakers and not wanting polarization and trying to be friendly. And then they turn this January 6th thing into essentially a bloodbath of Trump. And so I did like that he actually brought that up and threw it at Walz, who didn't say anything about it. So I'm giving 2 points to Vance. So those are kind of just some bonus points. So now I'm going to do things that were missed, and these are points lost. Okay. This was one of my big things. Someone could have easily brought up major corporations buying up single-family homes during the housing section, and it should have been Vance, because RFK is now endorsing Trump, and that's one of RFK's main points on his platform. And he didn't bring it up. If he would have brought that up, I mean, he would have. Let's see, what did I give him in housing? I didn't give him any points in housing, actually. I didn't give him a single thing in housing. If Vance would have brought that up, I would have given him at least 1 point. I probably would have had him tie, but he didn't bring it up. So I'm giving another -4 to Vance, because, I mean, that was what needed to be said. I don't know if he was told not to say it, but, I mean, that should have been said immediately when the housing part was coming up. So -4 to Vance. Okay, next one, and this is something I just absolutely hate about politicians. I kind of get it that it's part of the game, but I hate it. Both were constantly unwilling to say something that would have cleared the air, especially Vance. So when Walz said, "Are you willing to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election?" and Vance, again, I get it. He said, "I'm looking to the future. I don't even want to think about that." That's fine, but just say, I mean, what he should have said when Walz said, "Are you willing to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election?" His answer should have been, "Yes, he lost the 2020 election, but we're not talking about the 2020 election, and I'm looking forward to the 2024 election. I don't know why you're stuck on the 2020 election." I think that shows a lot about your administration and your party, that you can't even get past the 2020 election. Why should people trust you to run the 2024 to 2028 administration when you can't even get past the 2020 election? Boom. He would have won. I mean, he would have won the debate. I would have given him 4 points and everything, and he would have won. But he didn't. He wouldn't say that Donald Trump lost. And I'm sorry, but it just pisses me off. And Walz did the same thing at times. When things were brought up to Walz about Kamala Harris, he could have easily said, "Oh, that was a mistake. This is what we meant." Or, this is what our view is, but instead he had to like play this jump around game, and it's like that's annoying. Again, Walz didn't do it as bad. Vance did it the worst. So I'm doing -3 to Vance and just -1 to Walz, because Walz didn't do it as much, but there was a few times where I'd get like a twitch, and I'm like, just come on. But Vance especially. So the other one I'm giving points loss to, a big one to Walz, is I think Walz is like, I don't want to say Walz is unfamiliar with democracy, but I think he doesn't understand how fluid democracy can be. So, and I think this is a problem with a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans too, is their version of democracy they think is the only way. And so anything that goes against what they think is democracy, they just immediately say it's a threat to all democracies, which is super annoying. I mean, super annoying. If you're watching this video, or you watch this video or my democracy video, you have to understand that there are different forms of democracy. There is not this one. I mean, there's obviously things within a democracy that need to be happening within a democracy, but then there's a lot of things that can happen within a democracy that are different from each other. And one is like more federalist and anti-federalist behavior or policies. So like a stronger central government or a stronger state governments within the central government. Those are very different, and they look very different, but they both can happen within a democracy. And so I'm giving -5 to Walz because, like, I genuinely feel like he could not comprehend different variations of a democracy. Like, if you were to try to explain to him, hey man, like, you can have a democracy and do everything that Vance wants and still have a democracy, I feel like he could not even comprehend, like, no, that's impossible. It's not a democracy. It's fascism at that point. It's like, well, no, dude, there's still democracy within it. And I think Vance could comprehend, like, yeah, there could still be a democracy in, Walz's ideal world, but Walz could not get past, Donald Trump being a threat to democracy, to the point where it was like, do you actually think Donald Trump is a dictator, like a fascist? Like, is it like he's convinced me enough that he thinks he is, that I think he's actually convinced himself that he thinks Trump is a legit dictator, and it's like, it's just not true. And like, that makes me, and I think anyone who knows what a democracy is and can explain what a democracy is and its systems and whatnot, if you listen to Walz during debate, and especially during like the state of democracy, you get the vibe that he's like disconnected from what a democracy is and what it can be and how it can work. I'm giving -5 to Walz just because I feel like he's just saying threat to democracy just to say it, and I don't like those political games like that. I think he knows what a democracy is. I'm not saying I think he doesn't know, but I do think he doesn't understand that a democracy can look different, and that Vance's idea of what a democracy is not a threat to democracy. It's just a different view of what Walz and Harris's democracy looks like. So I'm giving him -5. I think he's just kind of playing the political game of, they're a threat to democracy, listen to me, they're a threat to democracy, you vote for them, it's a threat to democracy. When you keep hearing that over and over, you're going to think, oh, well, like, maybe they are a threat, and the threat's a scary word. It's just not true, and I think he's just saying it to say it. So -5. Okay, and the last thing, we didn't even talk about education. How did we not talk about education? Like, how do we talk about the state of democracy and not education? And this whole thing, we talked about the state of democracy and had a whole 5 to 10 minute segment on January 6th, but we didn't talk about education in the United States. Someone tell me how. This is a -20 points to CBS. So that's ridiculous. You're gonna bring up January 6th and the state of democracy in the United States in 2024, and you're not going to talk about education? Like, I don't know. Education is, I don't think it's a major issue, but I think the ironic part about this is you talk about the state of democracy, and the key to having a healthy democracy, talking about the state of democracy, the key is having a good education. And we didn't even talk about it. You want to talk about having a healthy democracy and you don't talk about education? I don't know. It's just, I don't get how you can talk about January 6th, the state of democracy, and all these threats to democracy and not talk about, like, well, maybe we should educate people. And, like, let me look through here. I'm looking through my notes to see, did anyone even mention education? No, I don't have any notes on education. So no one, as far as I remember, no one talked about education. Someone can comment and tell me that they did. I'll even take, if you comment and say they mentioned it, give me the time, like at what point they mentioned it. At least a mention would have been great. But like, it definitely was not a like, now let's, they didn't say let's move on to education. I don't know. Like, the state of democracy and education goes hand on hand. So if you're going to talk about the state of democracy, it should be called education, and we should discuss education. That would make way more sense than calling it the state of democracy. And then we just kind of, I almost feel like it set up Walz and Vance for failure, because by bringing up state of democracy, you're just like forcing them to fight each other, because they clearly have different views on January 6th. They both have way different views on what a true threat to democracy is. So like, I think it just sets them up. Again, it feels like news networks they want the polarization. They want the fighting. They want the violence. And this is like a perfect point of why news and media is so terrible when it comes to a real healthy democracy. Is they don't really care about the health of democracy and the state of democracy. They just want a good show. If they really cared, they would have just talked about education and educating people so that the state of democracy is a healthier society and a healthier democracy. But instead, they go the January 6th route and the whole, essentially flipping Vance and Walz against each other as much as they can to get, content out of it. Anyway, so that's a minus 20 to CBS. You know what? Minus $1 million to CBS. I mean, come on. Come on. So, okay, my final thoughts. This will be super quick. I think the race should be between JD Vance and Tim Walz. Get Trump and Kamala out. I'm not a big Kamala fan. I'm not a big Trump fan. Their debate sucked, to say the least. 1 out of 10 for their debate. It was, for a political person, it wasn't boring. It's probably why the media loves it so much. It wasn't boring. It was really exciting. It was really funny. It was hilarious. But it was like, after you're done laughing about that debate, you look back and you're like, we talked about nothing. Like, we literally talked about nothing. I don't know one new thing about Trump after that. I don't know one new thing about Kamala after the debate. I mean, some new policies, I guess, but I mean, it was just dumb. So my final thoughts on this are, this race should really be between JD Vance and Tim Walz. If that was the case, it'd be such a better campaign. It would be a much more fun election. Both are extremely talented. Both are better candidates than their running mates. I got the vibe JD Vance is much more of a politician, but he has more of a human side, which I like. And Tim Walz is much more human, so you could tell he makes mistakes and he messes up, but he's a lot more personable, a lot less politician-y. Although he does give off some of the slimy politician vibes, along with JD Vance though. Since the debate, I've seen a lot of Republicans talking about Walz saying he's friends with school shooters. I mean, just shut up about that. I mean, come on. He clearly misspoke. He's a lot more human. Again, it's so ironic. Come on, Republicans. Come on. Your whole point of wanting to vote for Trump was that he wasn't a politician. Tim Walz is not a politician, and now you're making fun of him that he messed up something because he's not a politician. A politician would have not made that mistake. A true politician knows exactly what to say, when to say it, how to say it, and they say it perfectly. Tim Walz is not that guy. He is not a politician. He's much more human than JD Vance. And you cannot convince me on that. So when he said, I'm friends with school shooters, clearly he misspoke and he meant something else. But Republicans ripping on him for that is ironic, because it's the amount of times that Donald Trump has screwed up on something he said and misspoke when he meant something else and clearly meant something else. And Republicans are like, oh, he clearly misspoke and meant something else. And Democrats are like, well, he said it still. And but it's like, he's not a politician. He's a human. He's going to mess up. He's not trained for this. He's not trained like a politician to say exactly what he means. And so now Republicans now flipping and being like, oh, Tim Walz is an idiot. He doesn't know what to say. He said he's friends with school shooters. Isn't that insane? It's like, he clearly misspoke. And this is the whole reason you're voting for Trump, is because he's not a politician. And now you're ripping on Walz because he's not a politician. Get a hold of yourself. Come on. Okay. Other than that, yeah, I thought it was a really good debate. I really, really, really liked the debate. The winner of the debate, I think, I'd have to double check. So the winner of this, I'm giving it the upper hand to Vance by just a couple points, as you can see. I think that's accurate. I think Vance did a better job. He was a little more convincing. I think that's kind of the key in these debates, is you just need to be a little more convincing. And I give it to Vance. He was a little more convincing. Walz, I think, at times played too much of the emotion card, which is fine. It definitely, I think that's good to do. But I think he didn't back it with enough argumentative talk. His convincing just wasn't there. He didn't give me enough that I was convinced by him. But I was really surprised by him. I kind of came into it, not a Walz hater, but I was surprised that Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz. And so I was like, when she chose Tim Walz, I was like, oh my gosh, JD Vance is going to just tear up Tim Walz in the debate. Why did she choose Tim Walz? He did way better than I expected. JD Vance did exactly how I expected. He didn't wow me, but he didn't disappoint. He just did solid. And JD Vance is a solid dude. Tim Walz was really impressive. Really good dude. I'm just giving it to JD Vance because he was a little more convincing. He kept his cool a lot better. For the most part, he took a lot of Tim Walz's arguments and and shut them down and made his appear more convincing. But again, I have to give props to Walz because he did really, really, really well. Walz could have won that debate, which it was surprising to me. And actually, at the end of the debate, my initial thought was that Walz won, actually. And after I kind of went through my point system, Vance kind of came out on top, and I was like, that makes sense. And I rewatched a few sections, and I agreed. I think JD Vance deserves the win in my book. So, yeah, I think that's that. Let me know what you thought of the debate.